This is Down the Rabbit Hole, where we question the mysteries and nature of reality. I'm your host, Justin Perry.
So, this actually happened last week. It just took me some time to come to terms with it. I got a phone call from my next-door neighbor late in the evening asking if I can help him move a mattress into his upstairs. His mom is ill and has a big, heavy sleep number bed. I, of course, ran over to help because they're great neighbors. I get over there and his friend, who is also a priest, was there to help. I helped them figure out how to separate the mattress from the bed so we could fit it upstairs. We get it all moved up and back in place when my neighbor asks if I can help them move an armoire upstairs too. I think nothing of it, and we pull it out of his travel trailer and start bringing it up the front stairs of his house. This is where I died. The front stairs are 11 steps. I was on the lower end of the armoire, about 6 steps up, when my neighbor and his friend lose a handle on the armoire, and it comes crashing down on me, and I fall backwards towards the pavement. I then wake up in my dining room to my phone ringing, and my wife asking me if I'm going to answer the phone. It's my neighbor asking me if I can help move a bed upstairs for his mom. I go over there and meet his priest friend again, as this has been the first time I met him. I say I can help with the bed, but I cannot help with the armoire. My neighbor was like, "How'd you know about the armoire?" I then proceeded to tell them I'm pretty sure I just died. I spent the next hour talking with the priest. He had so many questions. My neighbor didn't believe it until I described the upstairs bedroom in perfect detail, down to the metal mattress frame on the floor and the intricate headboard leaning against the wall, and I had never been upstairs in their house before. The priest asked me what I saw after I died. I told him I never actually died. Before it happened, I woke up at my dining room table. This happened about 2 years ago, and I was so blown away I took notes and told my wife about it. I still have the notes on my phone. My 5-year-old son was pretty typical for his age. Always goofing around, never serious, always working some angle to negotiate treats or buying whatever thing was at the top of his list this week. Kids have a selfish worldview, and that's mostly understandable because they haven't matured yet. So when my son asked me to go for a walk, just the two of us, I immediately laughed and thought, okay, what's he gonna ask for? We start walking, and I ask, "What's on your mind, buddy?" He said, "Nothing really. I just want to have some time to be with you and be peaceful and be out in nature." Wow, okay, this is progress, I thought. Then he said, "I want you to know you're the best dad I've ever had. You really do help me and my sister a lot, and you're really very nice, even though we don't usually tell you. So I just wanted to say thank you for everything, and that I want to be near you always." By this point, the only reason I wasn't completely crying my eyes out is that I thought it was some kind of a joke or lead up to ask for something. This was totally out of character, especially at this age. I managed to croak out something like, "I'm really glad to hear that, and I love you very much." Then we just enjoyed the rest of the walk. It really felt like for a moment I was speaking to a soul who has had several lives, like someone who's been here before. He wanted to speak directly to me instead of playing the role of a child. Freaky, I know. I'm honestly glad it happened, and it's something I will never forget. He later went right back to being the same old goofy kid that I love. About 30 seconds ago, I was sitting on the couch as my dog walked by to go sit on her bed. We have behind the L part of the sectional. She had something small caught in her throat last night. I think a popcorn shell, so I was paying attention to her breathing just to make sure she got it out. For a few minutes, she was breathing fine, and then what sounded like a light snore started happening. This is semi-normal for her depending on what position she's laying in, so I didn't bother to go over and check on her. That went on for about 5 minutes, until the most disgusting, and to my now realization, terrifying, snore-cough wheezing sound started happening. I go over to her to make sure she's okay, and the exact moment I looked at her bed, the sound stopped mid-breath, and she wasn't there. She was outside with my parents. Had been for around 30 minutes. There's no way to get out of the room without it walking right past me. I don't know whose fucking dog I saw and what was making that creepy-ass sound, but I'm going to be staying outside for the rest of the day. My last semester at a certain college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note he was 325 pounds. I was 120 pounds. While unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After 2 years, we got married, and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. I had a great job, and my wife didn't have to work outside of the house when my son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him and my daughter. One day, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim on 4 legs and a white square shade. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it. The next morning I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. I stopped eating. I left the couch, only to use the bathroom at first. Soon I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. I stared at the fucking lamp for 3 days before my wife got really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this time my cognizance was breaking up. And my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp is not real. The house is not real. My wife, my kids. None of that is real. The last 10 years of my life are not fucking real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and I became aware of pain. A fucking shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth," and opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I didn't know. Lots were freaking out. I was completely confused. At some point, a cop scooped me up, drag-walked me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. I was still confused. I was taken to the hospital by the cop. Seems he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive and give CAT scans and shit. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. I'd like to preface this by saying my husband is an electrical engineer and I'm a teacher. We're not crazy people. So back when my husband and I were dating, my husband was in a terrible car crash. His truck hit black ice and he slid into oncoming traffic. His truck was completely totaled. So was the other truck he hit. The weird thing is, though, both he and the other guy were completely fine. Not a scratch on them. All my husband had was a bruise on his knee. The first responders were baffled, as was the towing company and insurance, when they realized no one had died, was severely injured. Fast forward to a few days after the crash, my husband comes over to my apartment. We're having a conversation about a university class we're both in, and he casually asks when I got the flat-screen TV sitting on my dresser. At this point, I'm very confused because I've had the little flat screen since I was 13 and had it the entire year and a bit we'd been dating. I asked him what he's talking about, as I've always had that TV. He told me to quit pulling his leg and asked me what I did with the old tube TV. I had no idea what he was talking about and told him so. He's convinced I had a tube TV. I proceed to get on Facebook and showed him a picture we had taken 2 weeks prior with the TV in the background. It's a flat screen in the picture. My husband goes white, like he's seen a ghost, and just stares into space for a minute. His eyes started to water. I asked him what's wrong, and he said, "I swear to God, I'm not crazy. You've had a tube TV since we started dating. It was a tube TV when we took that picture." I brushed it off as his head being rattled from the accident, and he didn't bring it up again. However, anytime we hung out in my room, he'd always look at the TV weird. Fast forward 7 years, my husband and I have been married for a few years and decide that we're ready to be parents. I'm not on birth control, and we decide whatever happens, happens. We're not actively trying, but not preventing it either. So, we're on vacation in Italy, wandering around Rome, and I feel like shit. I had my period the week before, and it was the worst one I'd had in my whole life. As we're walking around, I am suffering from back pain, chills, and horrific cramping. I go to the bathroom in a cafe and hurl my guts out, have diarrhea and realize I'm menstruating heavily. Obviously, I'm weirded out since I had just had my period the week before. I clean myself up, go back to my husband and tell him I think I need a doctor. I have a pretty high pain tolerance, but this is insane. It's getting to the point I'm having trouble walking, and I'm starting to feel pain in my shoulders. I don't want to ruin our vacation, but I'm starting to really worry. My husband is smarter than me, sees the state I'm in, and says I'm visibly paler than when I went into the bathroom and gets me help. 20 minutes later, I'm on a stretcher and being taken to the hospital. An hour after that, I'm being prepped for emergency surgery as doctor tells me I have a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. I have heavy internal bleeding, and if he doesn't perform surgery, I am going to die. 6 hours later, I wake up very sore and tired. Doctor tells me I'm very lucky, and if I had waited any longer to seek medical attention, I'd be dead. Husband stays with me in the hospital the first night, then gets a hotel for the rest of my stay. A week later, we're cleared to fly home, and I go through a grueling month of healing from the surgery. 2 months after our return, somehow my husband and I get on the topic of fires, and he goes on about the dangers of kitchen fires, and I say, no need to worry. We're all set with the extinguisher in the closet. He looks at me like I have 3 heads and asks me what I'm talking about. I remind him about the extinguisher in the front closet where we keep the coats. We've had it for 3 years. He insisted we buy one when we bought our house. My husband shakes his head and tells me he has no idea what I'm talking about, and we don't have a fire extinguisher. I remind him about not only my memories of fighting about if we really needed one, where to put it, buying it from Home Depot, but also installing it to the wall in the closet. He looks at me with confusion and tells me none of that happened. I get up, go to front closet to show it to him, all the while cursing him for being an asshole, for forgetting our 2-week fight about it, and lo and behold, not only is there no extinguisher, there's no holes in the wall where I know we installed it. No fresh paint. This wall has never been touched. I insist he's moved it and fixed the wall and ask why the fuck he would play such a stupid prank. He continues to insist we've never had one, let alone talked about getting one. This goes on for several minutes. I'm approaching hysterics, telling him to quit playing with me when finally he says, "Now you know how I feel about that TV." We didn't speak about it for a long time. Then, after I found this thread, he brought up his theory that perhaps, in another timeline dimension, whatever you want to call it, we both actually died and we somehow got a reset. 3 days ago, I was having a sit-down with my dad, and he was telling me about his university life. Basically, my dad came from nothing. He had a very difficult upbringing and went to the worst school and high school in our city. When it was time for him to join the university, my grandfather passed away, leaving my dad to take care of the rest of the family as he was the oldest son. He took some bad advice in which he regrets to this day. The courses were taught in English, which is a second language for us. My dad told me that it was the darkest times in his life, and he just wanted to run away and was even thinking of unaliving himself. Now, very recently, he got his master's in English literature, and he was telling me that he didn't think it would be ever possible for him. My dad just recently finished this degree at an age of 55. The next morning, my dad had to drive to town to visit some distant relatives. I guess they needed some financial assistance. My dad is very a kind soul and is always willing to help. The town is 3 hours away. He usually takes public transport, but didn't because of recent world events. So he left, and my mom was worried. So we decided we will keep calling him every hour to check on his well-being. So I decided to call him. It's usually bad reception on the highway near me. He told me to wait and parked at a nearby restaurant. It was like a checkpoint for trucks. I don't know what came over me, but I started crying and went on to tell him how proud I was of him. I just babbled and kept saying that he shouldn't think he is lacking because he is not. He was an amazing father and a great person to look up to. My dad started crying. He told me that he will talk to me when he gets back. Well, he returned and he just hugged me out of nowhere. He told me 30 years ago he was visiting the same town, and it was the time when he was at his lowest. He was visiting the same relatives, and he was at a bus stop, which stopped at a petrol station. He called his mother, and when he picked up the phone, without even dialing, he heard my voice telling him the exact same thing I told him yesterday. He said that he didn't even call my grandmother. He just stood there and cried. He said it gave him the strength to keep fighting, to keep living. He said he just now realized it was me whose voice he heard. My parents took this as a sign from God. This happened yesterday, and it still makes me uncomfortable. I was at the train station on my way back from work when I saw a couple. What drew my attention was the fact that they were speaking my language, so I looked at them. The woman was built and looked exactly like me, and I don't have a very common appearance for the country I live in, but about a decade older, and the man was an aged carbon copy of my current boyfriend. But what really set my creepy radar off was the following. She had the tattoo I always wanted to get exactly where I wanted to get it, and it's a very personal design only my best friend knows about, so not a common tattoo. He was speaking my native language with a very distinctive accent of his home country, which is similar but not the same as the way people from the country we live in speak my language. So I looked at them when they were facing the other way, feeling extremely creeped out. It was then that the woman turned around and saw me, freezing instantly as if she had seen a ghost. Then I finally managed to look away and run towards the exit. I really feel like I'm going insane here. It was as if she remembered that exact moment and knew exactly when and where to look for me. I didn't tell anyone because I don't want them to think I'm completely nuts. Rewind back to September 2015. I was a freshman who had just entered high school 2 weeks prior. Already school was weighing down on me, and I'd been continuing a habit I had of going on walks to clear my mind. On this day, I'd been walking around a pond near my house. There's a trail that goes around the pond, and then the trail leads up to a set of abandoned train tracks on the other side, which sit about 15 feet above the path and pond below. After walking the circle, I was crossing the train tracks when I decided I wanted some ice cream. The fastest way to get to the ice cream shop was to take the path below the train tracks, but there isn't any way to cross the pond without going all the way back around, and being 14 years old, I decided that I could just jump from the tracks onto the path below and keep walking. Looking down from above, it didn't seem to be that far of a jump, so that's what I did. The next thing I remember after that was being half-conscious in an ambulance. Everything was extremely blurry, and the paramedics sounded slightly panicked. I wasn't able to move either of my legs, so I think they were both broken. This scene continued on for a few minutes, until we arrived at the hospital and I was wheeled into the emergency room on a stretcher. I only had a few minutes in the emergency room before I eventually lost all consciousness, and that was the last thing I saw. After I'd been unconscious for what felt like about an hour, I opened my eyes and I was on the ground. I'd just hit the ground after jumping, but this time I was fully conscious. I hadn't noticed this before I jumped, but there had been a car parked watching me. I think they thought I was attempting suicide, but it probably looked that way, and the people in it had jumped out and called an ambulance for me. The ambulance ride had been the exact same as it was the first time, and I was put into the same emergency room that I had died in before. The only difference between the two events were that I was fully conscious this time, and my injuries were much more minor. I was discharged from the hospital the same night, with only stitches in my lip, a slightly fractured jaw, and a mild concussion. For a while after this, I assumed that the first scenario had just been a weirdly coincidental dream that I'd had while I was unconscious, so I didn't consider it anything abnormal. It wasn't until a few weeks after, when my mom told me that the people who had helped me said that I had been conscious the entire time. I hadn't been knocked out after hitting the ground or anything. So that entire scenario managed to happen in the few seconds it took for me to hit the ground, while I was still conscious. Anyways, I'm not very good at describing things, especially with how blurry this day was now that it was years ago. But I'm 17 years old now, and I still have no way to explain what happened that day other than I died and was given a second chance. Let me preface this by saying there has always been creepy shit happening around me, and I have several stories of my dad's old house, which myself and my siblings all agree is haunted as fuck. I also had my dead best friend visit me twice, which was nice. So this evening my partner, 42 male, and I, 30 female, were upstairs sorting laundry when his daughter, 17, called us downstairs as dinner was ready. I was heading down the stairs, my partner right behind me, literally 2 steps behind me. He did his usual thing of tickling the back of my neck as we walked. The bottom of our stairs is wooden, so you can hear when somebody steps onto it from the carpeted stairs. When we got to the bottom, my feet hit the floor as usual. I turned to ask him something and he wasn't there. He wasn't fucking there. I totally froze for a second and looked up the stairs, and there he was, on the top step, pale and shaking. Asked him what the F just happened, and he kept saying, I don't know. I was behind you, and before I hit the bottom, the next step took me back upstairs. We are very freaked out. Didn't say anything to our girl, as she is already leery of this stuff, although he and I are somewhat used to it. I'm trying to get the courage to leave my laptop recording audio overnight because there definitely is something weird happening. I know this story is going to sound weird and crazy, but hear me out. I'm not too familiar with this subreddit, but a friend of mine who's always talking about metaphysics, Twilight Zone, simulation type stuff loves this sub and keeps telling me to post this. In fact, no doubt he'll read this. Anyways, here's my story. 2 weeks ago, I was about to get ready for a party at 6. Just before I started getting ready, one of my friends messaged me, super excited, because a boy she's had a crush on for the last 4 years finally asked her out, and he was coming with her to the party. While I was texting her back, my younger brother walked into my room and asked if I could drive him to his friend's house, which I agreed to do. Then I went to the bathroom to have a shower and do my makeup. So I got in the shower. But when I went to wash my hair, I realized that my conditioner was finished. I was pretty ticked off because I'd only bought it a couple of days beforehand, and it's an expensive brand. My younger sister always uses up my things, so I knew she'd used it all. She'd also trashed the bathroom, leaving water everywhere and her dirty towel on the floor. I was pissed off and was about to get out of the shower in order to tell her off and get some more conditioner. But as I went to get out, I realized at the last second that she'd kicked the grippy mat we have at the bottom of our shower. Tub up, our shower tub is super slippery without the grip mat. So as I went to step out, my foot slipped and I fell with my neck down onto the edge of my tub. Time seemed to slow down in my head, and I remember my last thought was, wow, this is how I die. How stupid. At the moment of impact, I woke up in a start, back in my bed. I know it sounds stupid and cheesy, like something from a dumb Netflix show, but there's literally no other way to describe what happened. I was lying in bed right before I got up to shower the first time, but I don't remember falling asleep. And the thing is, I've been a lucid dreamer for the last 5 or so years, and if this was a dream, it was way more vivid than anything I've ever experienced. What weirded me out, though, was that the exact same friend who texted me the first time messaged me after I woke up to tell me that the boy she had a crush on had asked another girl out, and she was pretty bummed about it and didn't want to come to the party. I was weirded out that there was some similarity between that and the dream, but didn't think much of it at first. As I went to reply, my younger brother came in to ask if I would take him to his friend's house. All the blood drained from my face. He just stood in the doorway looking confused and asked me what was wrong. I rushed into the bathroom, feeling like I was losing my fucking mind, and went to check the conditioner bottle. I know this sounds completely crazy, but the bottle was finished, just like before, and the grip mat was kicked up. At that point, I went to lie back down in bed and texted my friends to tell them that I wouldn't be going to the party.